Will Republicans in Congress push legislation to officially end all food stamps? It's something I think might actually happen. And the reason I think it might actually happen is because we've seen a lot of other instances where right-wing media figures push a sort of narrative and then it gets picked up by Republican politicians. So in this case, we have a bunch of right-wing figures talking about, oh, look, people are mad about, SNAP benefits being canceled for certain people, but did you know there's so many instances of fraud with this? And they'll point out stories where there actually is fraud. And I will admit there is food stamp fraud. In fact, EBT fraud is a thing that exists. Now, Republicans, right-wingers are disingenuous because they act like, oh, this is the only thing we have to talk about with respect to SNAP. And they use that to basically obfuscate. They use it to say, pay no attention to the genuinely needy people, the genuinely hungry people who do not get assistance when food stamp benefits are canceled. They say, no, you just want to stick it to the lazy people, the lazy scammers. Let's do that. And so this is where it reminds me of this old post. I think it was some quote. I would be okay with feeding a couple lazy bums if it meant that I helped prevent 100,000 people from going hungry. You know what? Yeah. So sometimes you do help out the lazy bums, in fact, the people who don't want to work. Sometimes people who check out of society do get help. But you know what? What's more important is making sure that the people who are genuinely trying to work, genuinely out there applying for jobs, struggling with poverty, struggling with food insecurity, maybe they're disabled, maybe they're taking care of a disabled relative, make sure that they get food. Make sure they're able to live a good life. And you know what? That's more important than trying to own the lazy people in society. I don't totally agree that there are nearly as many lazy people as Republicans and right-wingers make it out to be. But yeah, they're all out there just, casting aspersions and showing their horrendous view of all of humanity, basically. They, oh yeah, just a bunch of lazy bums who need to find God or something. But with respect to my point about how Republicans pick up on these talking points that people in the right-wing media use, there are plenty of other examples. So consider the trashing of Somalians that President Trump did in the White House during a cabinet meeting the other day. He goes out and says, they're garbage. I mean, you got these Somalians in Minnesota. They're not really doing anything. They're not doing anything. They just leech off the system. Ilhan Omar is garbage. We don't want these people in our country. He went off on this horrific rant just saying that stuff. And the members of his cabinet were like, yeah, you got him, bud. Go boss. Yeah, you're so amazing. So President Trump, if I had to guess, picked that up from people in the right-wing media sphere. He didn't just notice it on his own one day. He didn't just read some article. He watched videos of right-wing commentators going, the Somalians in Minnesota are really bad and they're taking over and they're basically turning Minnesota into Mogadishu and it's terrible and there's not enough white people and too much Somalians, it's really bad, and Tim Walz is aiding and abetting fraud and he should be thrown in prison and this is just the worst thing ever. And so President Trump is like, oh yeah, I should repeat this one at a cabinet meeting. That'd be really cool. They give me a lot of applause for that. And sure enough, they did. Sure enough, a bunch of right-wing accounts are like, oh yeah, he got it. Oh, he's picking up on our talking points. They must feel so good to have a president that they can really just, they can feed these talking points into the Republican bubble and they'll get picked up, Whereas with leftists and Democrats, it's like they'll say stuff and Democrats might pick up on some of it. Like, for example, Tim Walz making the J.D. Vance couch joke, which obviously is not actually confirmed or anything, but he made that couch joke when he had his first rally as vice presidential nominee, saying, if J.D. Vance can get off the couch and debate me, in response to that joke on X. He goes, see what I did there? So they have that sometimes, but usually it's Republicans who are the ones who are like, what is our base talking about over on X.com? What are the independent media types talking about? What are they mad about? They're mad about Somalians? Okay, cool. I'm going to talk about Somalians and rant about them in this cabinet meeting. There also is talk about, transgenderism. Transgenderism, I don't think a lot of Republican politicians are super fixated on transgenderism. Maybe a few are, but I think that really the right-wing media who just go gloves off, go total bigotry, go total, transgender bad, trans people in sports bad. The Republican politicians are like, oh, that is a good way to deflect from our horrendous economic policies. That will get people mad. That will get people up in arms. They'll say, well, I don't want a man going into the women's room with my daughter. I don't want a man beating my daughter at a swim competition. Riley Gaines says that women should be in women's sports and not men. And so they'll be like, okay, cool, let's talk about this as we try to jam through a ridiculous piece of legislation that guts the social safety net and cuts taxes almost exclusively for the wealthy. Big, beautiful bill, So they again, the ecosystem that they have is just, it's kind of enviable. You know, progressives don't really have that same thing with the Democratic Party. They're not really represented in the mainstream political system, not nearly as much. I mean, you have people like AOC and Zohran Mamdani, kind of like Tim Walz, you know, but overall, Republican politicians are just like, oh yeah, no. Marsha Blackburn, she asked Ketanji Brown Jackson in her confirmation hearing back in 2022. I don't know if you remember that, but she asked, what is a woman? So just directly quoting Matt Walsh, you know, in a Senate confirmation hearing. And Matt Walsh is like, yeah. So they get to go out there and, you know, they'll quote right-wing figures. You know, they'll quote Rush Limbaugh. You got, you know, Ted Cruz is a huge Rush Limbaugh fan. You got all these, Mike Pence too, he was quoting him on a speech in the House floor back when he was in the House of Representatives. But you don't have progressive media people being quoted by Democratic politicians. So all of this to say, I think Republican politicians are probably watching some of these independent media coverage videos and stuff of politicians and, oh, you know, this food stamps bad, everything is going to hell with EBT. There's so much scamming going on. Steven Crowder had a video, a Change My Mind video called End All SNAP Benefits. And he went up and, you know, he debated mostly college students, and, you know, from a rhetorical standpoint, he did a pretty darn good job. He did a pretty good job. He was quick. He had statistics. Now, I'm sure that some of them were bent out of context and manipulated, but he was able to respond to all of their objections fairly well. And so I'm sure some Republican politicians are going to see that and be like, yo, okay, this is what's up. This is what's up. It's time to end all SNAP programs. You got Joni Ernst definitely making a move in Congress to kind of monitor SNAP more closely and be like, oh, we're going to make sure that you states are handling this right. You know, they say, oh, we want to reform these welfare programs. And when they say reform, what they really mean is gut them. They did that with Social Security before. Democrats actually did kind of wise up to it eventually. But yeah, FDR warned of this, where they said, yeah, the Republican politicians are going to go right along with Social Security and all of the New Deal programs, but then they're going to say, you know, this is so good, I think we got to make it better. We got to make it better. We got to reform it. We got to find a way to really reduce the fraud and make things extra special and, yeah, reform it. Now, if it happens to disappear under our watch, whoa, well, you can't blame us for that. You got to blame the Democrats or something, or, you know, we were just acting in good faith and, well, look, it just disappeared or something. And, you know, there were some scammers relying on it. So whatever if it disappears. But yeah, I think the war on food stamps that the right-wing media has been waging, it's very coordinated. It's deceitful, it's tactful at the same time, where it's like, okay, single out these instances of fraud, single out some TikToker who's going on a rampage about losing their SNAP benefits or something, and be like, well, this person looks like they're able-bodied and looks like they're doing just fine, and, you know, they're probably a scammer and stuff like that. Propagandize their audiences, get them mad about SNAP benefits, and the Republican politicians probably recognize that it's propaganda and it's deceitful, but they're like, hey, it goes right along with our agenda of helping billionaires. SNAP benefits don't help billionaires, so hey, let's cut them. That's their whole idea. And so I would not be surprised if by 2027 there is a bill proposed to end all SNAP benefits. I think Republicans recognize they're probably going to lose at least the House of Representatives in the 2026 midterm elections, meaning they have until about January 2027 with their trifecta. And so I wouldn't be surprised if sometime during the 2026 year, there is a bill introduced to end all SNAP benefits. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This is the more the merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.